Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our conversation today about code switching with alumni from color from the Lakes Region School. So my name is Paula Glover. I am a trustee at the Cardigan Mountain School. My son, Layton, class of 22, will be graduating in just a couple of months. We are very, very excited. But really excited to be here with all of you to listen to our esteemed panelists talk about their own journey and experiences. I think it's going to be something that we all, including myself, are going to learn from. And so I ask you all to listen and listen thoughtfully. As people share the world and the paths in which they travel, ask questions, but also let's enjoy ourselves and remember that we are all one community. Whether you are schools that compete against one another or not, we're all one community. And at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is learn from one another. And so with that, I am going to invite Mr. Lawrence Q. Alexander II to moderate. The whole name. And I couldn't read the title, but CSS, like, let's get it all correct. Those credentials were hard earned, I'm sure.
Well, listen, I much appreciate it. And I think of all the things that Paula mentioned, Paula is also a trustee. And I think it's important to know that as it speaks to the cultural anthropology of schools, our boards ought to be on board as it relates to advancing inclusion, equity, and belonging for all of our students, particularly our students and community members of color. It ain't so bad having a board member too. So thank you so much, Paula, for the great work that you're doing. My name is Lawrence Alexander. I have the great fortune of leading the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practice at Carney Sandow & Associates based in Boston. But before that, I come with about 10 years of working in independent schools. Most prevalently, and what's salient, feels important for this conversation, is that I had the great fortune of working in the Lakes region at the White Mountain School, as they would say, from New Jersey, wicked far, way up in northern New Hampshire, in a little town called Bethlehem. For those of you all familiar with Highway 93, we're just at exit 40, 71 miles from the Canadian border. I do remember. So I worked at the White Mountain School as a director of college counseling and as a director of DEI. My daughter, Jalen, is White Mountain class of 2020. She's a sophomore now at Wake Forest University. One of my children, Matthew, is actually born at LRH. That's Littleton Regional Hospital. So he's a Grafton County resident. We've made our time from growing up in Jersey City, New Jersey, to living in northern New Hampshire. So as a parent, as an administrator, now as a professional working with schools, having a child who's gone through an independent school education and that of the Lakes region, we greet you. We're grateful. We're glad that you're here. This conversation about the code switch. Remember where you were, from the communities that you came from, and some of you did come from New England, and yet independent schools were a totally different world. Many of us came from New Jersey, New York, from places nearer and way further than the hike, literally, up to the Lakes region, to Vermont, to Maine, to New Hampshire, to the several places that we went. It was a whole new world, and it was different. There was a code, there was a language, there was a hidden culture, a hidden curriculum, and you navigated your way, and you made the switch. Not necessarily being less of who you are, but being you in a way that was new, innovative, and imaginative. You made the code switch, and at a period of time after graduating, and it's so awesome wait till you meet all these great alums that we have on our panel, you wonder if you're ever going to have to make that kind of cultural negotiation code switch again. Then for some of us, we go off to post-secondary institutions. For some of us, colleges and universities. And we find that those code switch, quick twitch fibers and muscles come in handy. We leave education and go into the workplace, and maybe they're helpful again. Every rose has its thorns, we do know. And there's something about that cultural negotiation, that cultural navigation of the code switch that is helpful. Tonight, we'll learn from a number of alums from our schools that are represented here. Can't wait to introduce them to you in a moment. I also want to speak to our listening audience in a little bit of how we might carry and model the conversation. And we're going to go to about 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time before we jump into a really cool app that we like folks to try out, where we can do a little bit of speed networking. But of that time, there are heads of school, saw a couple of My colleagues make their ways in, a couple of community members, faculty, staff members, some current students. And so there's a lot of great folks who are coming to learn from the conversation. We would ask that in this first pass, we want to center our conversation and authentically be without interruption, our awesome panel of alums, and we'll have a conversation with them. As they are sharing, we do want to make space for questions. And if you'll put those in the chat, we have some of our other colleagues who'll be able to kind of mine the chat, and we'll turn those into a little bit of a Q&A after about 30 minutes or so in our conversation. We're glad to be here with you. We've said it to our panel and certainly want to normalize it for folks here. I think James Baldwin was right in saying that, you know, not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until you face it. In navigating some of these cultural negotiations, there are some truths that our alums and students have to face. And in this conversation, that negotiation and connective tissue is going to be helpful. And so we're certainly asking our alums to share from the integrity of their truth and asking us to listen from that place of appreciation. So we're glad to be with you all here and know that you made your time. Let me introduce your panel to you. I will start with their names, graduation years, and their schools. When we start and they share, they can do a more full bio about where they're from, about what they're doing now, and a little bit about tonight. But I do want to leave more of that to them. But I'll just read as we have them here in order. So you know me and Paula, we're your humble moderators, co-moderators tonight. But first, from Holderness, we have Nathan MacBeth, and that's class of 2010. We also have Miguel Allport, class of 2007. And that is, I'm starting to feel so aged, 2007, and VA Vermont Academy. Malcolm Boyd joining us from the class of 2003, and Cardigan Mountain. Penelope Durand, a little biased from our little town of Bethlehem, the White Mountain School, class of 2012. Emily White Hat, class of 94, and that's Proctor Academy. And then Lizzy Touchy, because I wanted to find out how to pronounce it correctly. Lizzy, thank you for being here from the Dublin School class of 2013. So we wanted to start tonight, and we'll certainly ask you all, like we do with our students, if you remember, it's taking you back a little bit, we'll do a popcorn style. So you don't have to worry about going in order. When you're ready, your kernel's in the pot, you can pop when you're hot. If you can just start by introducing yourselves in ways that we might have missed, whether those are fun facts, places you're proud to be from, just other ways of introducing yourselves, maybe your formal titles, whatever else we might be missing in an introduction, feel free to do that. But to open the conversation on this idea of the code switch, what did code switching mean to you in your time back in independent schools, particularly at the ones you graduated from? And what has it meant to you now in the workplace? I think there's kind of this segmented experience where it's like, it's just that thing I had to do when I went to that New England boarding school. And we might find that there's some resonance for where it's carrying us post high school and maybe in the workplace. So certainly, you know, tell us your names, maybe something else we're missing in the fun factoids. But what did code switching mean to you in your time at your independent boarding school? And what does it mean to you now in the workplace? We just want to start socializing the definition of the code switch. So anyone can go first. You'll just hop off a mute and share. We'll do a popcorn style, but we'll hold space until everyone has gotten the opportunity to share. So of our panel, thank you for getting us started. Anyone can start.
Sure, I can go first. I'm Nathan MacBeth, class of 2010. As Lawrence said, I currently work in tech doing strategy and finance work. And I'm actually from about 10 minutes away from Holderness School in New Hampshire. So grew up in the heart of the White Mountains, currently live in Chicago. So kind of making the transition to living in a city and getting used to not being in the mountains and having beautiful scenery around, which is definitely a challenge. But for me, code switching has been more relevant in the corporate world than it was for me in independent schooling. Just having worked in like I worked at Deloitte for 2.5 years, Big Four culture, where it's like super buttoned up. You're not really welcome to bring your genuine self there. And I felt a lot of times there was a need for me to not only assimilate, but also overcompensate and kind of hide who I was for fear of being judged for not being the cookie cutter mold that everybody else was. now that I work in tech, it's totally different. Like the new wave of bring yourself, diverse perspectives, diverse people, help you do diverse work has been a total 180 from what I've seen. But I know there's still super persistent issues in a lot of companies where people don't feel like they can trust who they're working with, bring their genuine selves, and that they won't be judged for myriad reasons. So it's been more relevant in my professional experience, but it's still something that I feel like a lot of students combat with in, especially in like small private school settings also.
Well, Nathan, thank you for getting us kicked off. We do appreciate that. And it sounds like the marketplace relative to your chosen profession has also changed a bit, making it a little more possible. So thank you for getting us started. Others?
I can go next. Hi guys, thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Miguel. I graduated from Vermont Academy in 2007. I'm originally from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And right now I live in New York City, where I'm a senior designer at an ad agency in Chelsea. And my journey with code switching I want to say it kind of started when I was like a child growing up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. There was not a lot of diversity in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And so growing up, I always went by Mike. It made me feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I was different, even though physically, I was different. It was kind of like a safe space for me. And I used Mike all the way up, even through Vermont Academy. And I played a lot of sports. And again, I think part of that was using Mike was just like a safe space. I didn't want to feel different or vulnerable. And then it took until college when we were all kind of comparing our driver's license, a bunch of us, and someone got a hold of mine. It was just like, your real name's Miguel. And I was just like, yeah, it's Miguel. And she was just like, that's the coolest thing ever. Why do you go by Mike? Why would you ever go by Mike when your name's Miguel? And right then was kind of like a point where I think I switched to kind of just maybe asking questions about why am I going by Mike? I am Miguel. This is who you are. You shouldn't be ashamed. And yeah, now I use Miguel. And as I've transitioned through school and into the professional world, I've realized that, Miguel, being who you are is the most important thing. And not being afraid is also very important. And transitioning into kind of the creative space and being a designer, I've, feel like I've been welcomed everywhere I've been professionally. But I always kind of look back and wonder like what it would have been like if I had grown up and used Miguel my entire life. And I don't think there's any regret there, but I just kind of wonder what it would have been like. And I feel like, sharing that story and that message kind of to people that maybe are in a similar situation, or certainly younger people, that's an important thing to know and learn and feel comfortable to break out of, because part of me wishes I did earlier. So.
Miguel, thank you so much. I mean, that's such a powerful sharing and invulnerability. So thank you for that. Yeah. I have to imagine there's such resonance, certainly as there's, students, but I would imagine also alums, faculty, staff. There's a lot of folks resonating. It does make me think about a resource. I've shared it as a bit as we do this work, but thinking about kind of that cultural suppression and how we fit ourselves into dominant white culture. There's an author, she's a New York Times bestseller, Austin Channing Brown. For folks who have not read it, her name, Black woman, her parents gave her name Austin Channing Brown. They gave her a name that they believed to be a white man's name in order to fit into a world made for whiteness. And so the book is called I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, but it's a little bit about her journey through the code switch. So Miguel, thank you so much. I know that a lot of folks are resonating. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yep.
Others, code switch, how it maybe showed up for you in your time in school and maybe now. And Malcolm, I saw you come off from mute.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thank you, Lawrence. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Malcolm. I graduated from Cardigan Mountain School back in 2003. A fun way to describe myself now would be that I'm finally an entrepreneur. I had a long 10-year career in corporate America. I'm proud to say that my entrepreneur lifestyle has lasted for 2 years. So every day is a new blessing. So happy for the opportunity. So how I would define code switching personally would really have started when I originally went to Cardigan. So I'm originally from New York City, single mom, only child, and to alleviate some of that pressure and also provide, you know, an incredible education. My mom shipped me up to New Hampshire. And at the time I was, you know, maybe one of two other Black students. So as well as being, you know, a 10-year-old Black boy in America, being one of two students, there weren't very many people that I could see myself in at my peer level and also as adults. Cardigan provided a lot of support to, you know, us as boys, but there weren't a lot of teachers of color. So when it came to code switching, it became more of a comfortability thing, right? Finding a group of people that accepted me for who I was. And I think as, you know, any young person, you're really trying to figure out where you fit in this world already. So when you don't have an adult figure that looks like you or many peers that look like you start to gravitate towards people who do accept you for just the, you know, ounce of honesty you have within yourself. You know, as I got older, I realized that a lot of that code switching that I may have been doing when I went back home to the Bronx and then coming back up to New Hampshire was really, you know, me trying to find acceptance within other people. I think as I got older, I started to realize that instead of looking for that acceptance within others, I should focus on my own happiness and my own passions and really allow that to push me down a road, which would allow people who appreciated me for who I was become like my new team members and my new support cast. In doing so, you realize that the people that you were so focused on impressing in your younger years, that those amount of people really get cut down, and you less so care about, you know, the amount of people who support you, who are like you, and you just care about the quality of people who are around you and that support you. So yeah, that was really my experience with code switching. And now that, you know, I run my own business and kind of call the shots, I think that it sounds nice to hear myself say call the shots. I think that code switching really, it allowed me the opportunity to see the world in a grander view than I was, right? It allowed me to relate to people who didn't necessarily look at me or look like me or came from the same place that I did, and find some similarities. And it's allowed me to kind of just navigate, you know, the world ever since. And then obviously, the more genuine you are with yourself as you're going through that process, the easier it all becomes. So that's my 2 cents.
Malcolm, I really appreciate that, and that's deep. It connects, I know, with where even my daughter is now in college. That paradigmatic shift of seeing your acceptance through the eyes of other people accepting you, instead of, or as opposed to, right, being able to see it in the mirror and accepting yourself. It is quite the journey. And I got to tell you, it is a flex to hear you say that you're your own boss and you call the shots. That is a flex, young man. That's a big deal. Lizzy.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Lizzy. I'm currently living in Brooklyn, New York. So anyone in New York City, shout outs to New York. We can link later. I graduated from Dublin School in 2013, and then I attended Bowdoin College in Maine and graduated in 2017. And so I'm actually originally from Jersey, by the way of Ghana. I was born and raised. So when we talk about code switching, for me, there are like 3 layers of code switching. There is like my Ghanaian, like West African identity on top of my Black identity, Black American identity, and then having to fit into this like white world. And I would say code switching is a way to survive. And it's a way to sort of like know your authentic self and be able to mold and modify and adapt in a world so that people could better understand you. I learned about code switching at Dublin, but I don't think I needed it to survive at Dublin until I got to college. Bowdoin is when I really needed it to survive. And then I think graduating and then kind of like entering into the work world, it was when it was like, oh, this is the Olympics of code switching. This is where you get your gold medal. So I would say, because back in college, you kind of learned that like you have to code switch. Because if you're in class and you're saying, what's poppin', professor, let's get it. You kind of need for them to be able to understand you and really interpret what you're saying. So for a few moments, you kind of have to be able to say, well, good morning, professor. I saw you posted that. You have to be able to do that. I struggle with code switching because oftentimes I thought that I wasn't being my authentic self, or that I was picking up, picking and choosing parts of when I want to be this way and that way, and fighting with multiple identities within myself, like whether to be more Ghanaian, whether to be more Black American, whatever it meant. It kind of was like a identity crisis for a while. But then when I figured it out, I was like, this is a tool. This is a tool for me to succeed, because whether I like it or not, every space is not going to be POC, unfortunately, right? Because we live in a white world and we have to accept that. So you kind of have to know, like, you have to build this tool to be able to succeed. And once you succeed, and once you're at a platform where, okay, now that I'm at the table, where's my plate? Now we pop it. So it's until you're able to get to that table, you kind of really have to play that role. And it's a way for you to survive. Whether it is like literally learning how to just build those tiny skills and be able to like get that interview, right? For your internship or your job, be able to play the part, look the part. I mean, Rihanna said, and I'm quoting Rihanna because why not? Rihanna once said, like, they might be better than me, but they can't beat my outfit. And that is something that she's putting on to be able to sit at that table. So code switching is kind of like being able to put on this layer, this weapon base, essentially, to kind of like win that round. So I think in college, I saw it as a negative thing until I graduated, and I saw it as like a very powerful tool. So for especially young folks in here who are kind of like struggling with the identity of like, am I being my authentic self? Am I being fake? Am I not coming off as real? Like, what is it given? Just know that it is a necessary tool. You kind of need it to win the bag.
Lizzy, I appreciate that. And I don't know yet that I've been a part of a panel where we quoted Rihanna, and it feels so appropriate. I think there's two plugs here, thinking for folks that are maybe administrators here, as well as board members and current students. Part of what Lizzy talked about is that cultural exhaustion of negotiating cultures and differences. It's part of the reason that affinity groups are actually a net positive and helpful, because students are navigating so many cultures. It's the idea that us being together all the time doesn't work for those of us for whom that code switch, that culture switch, that language negotiation, we need a cultural timeout. So I think it's a nod to affinity groups and to young folks in the workforce. All of those intelligences that you display, all those cultures you negotiate, charge extra for that. That's extra in your salary. Anyone else in terms of the code switch, how it showed up in school? Hi, Emily.
Hamidakiapi layup batuashte you hayek sto naha la kochajeki na pewashte imachiapi naha Emily white hat imachiapi. Yuha chantewashte nape chuzape naha ashkegluipi naha sichangu lakota wa'u ita wa'u ksto. Really happy to see a fellow Lakota Proctor graduate, our Proctor student, Charles Bush, on with us today, and just want to give him a shout out. Introduce myself in Lakota. I'm Sichangu Lakota from the Rosebud Sioux tribe. That's the colonial federal name that was given to my tribe in 1934. And so there's a lot of layers to this. I've always been Lakota. I grew up in a really safe Lakota environment. And so I grew up being raised as a Lakota woman. I didn't know anything, that there wasn't anything different than that. And even though I grew up near some really racist, which today continue to be really racist border towns, there was still this safety of being in a group of people that I knew, so there was always being able to be who I was authentically, culturally, and traditionally, as well as just what I guess would be like, if any of you have watched Reservation Dogs, which was on Hulu last fall, that's probably one of the best descriptions of my childhood. But when I think about code switching, when I think about the aspects of culture and where it comes into play, there's a couple layers as a Indigenous woman, as a Lakota woman. One is that Oftentimes people view me are my people, specifically in the surface layer of art, fashion, and something that you want to be like. And so there's navigating through that environment. And then there's the really deep cultural aspect. And I think as a Lakota woman, one of the things that is a challenge is we are a political group. We're often put in a group as a minority group, but we're also a political group in this country. I am a dual citizen in this country as a Lakota citizen of the Sicangu Lakota Nation, and then also a citizen of the United States. And so there's always this navigating like through those layers of it. There's also the real deep spiritual, cultural aspect of who I am and where that comes into play. But we still have a lot of invisibility in this country today. And again, when you think of Native people, there's often this like surface. And that really is one of the things that I think about professionally today that I struggle with most. When I was at Proctor, there was like 4 Native students. That was a group of Native students back then. You know, when my son was at Proctor, he came in and the two men were graduating his freshman year, and then he was the only Native student for the next 3 years, you know. And I watched, unfortunately, and I have high hopes for Proctor, but I watched from my graduation until a couple of years ago, the diversity just go downhill, you know. And it was really something that was really hard to watch and to see happen because of the challenge of boarding schools, the cost of our schools, and who are we serving, right? And so at Proctor, there was diversity. There was a group of us. There was, I wouldn't say safety, but there was also this, when I was there, there were a group of students that made it known that we were the scholarship students. And there was definitely sort of this awareness that you had to perform even better, right? Because somebody was giving something to you. We may not have felt like that's the way we had to show up every day, but there was that pressure and that conversation that came into play. And I hope that doesn't exist today, but honestly, it probably still does in any of the schools that we see today. I think the biggest challenge that I work in philanthropy, mostly on the receiving end of individuals and program officers that see us as social justice issues. They don't necessarily even see us as people. And you tell that again when the first conversation goes into art, fashion, you know, then you know that you're really not a people, you're an object in the view of, and when we push back and we use our languages, when we incorporate our cultural beliefs into our work, we get told that we're muddying the waters of what we're trying to do. But what frustrates me is those same program officers that are saying that are probably talking about us at their cocktail hour, right? About what they're doing to help this group of people. And so, you know, that may not be code switching, but it's navigating all the complexities of what's happening in that space. And I think the last thing I'll say professionally is it's varied by position and organization I've worked in. I've worked in corporate America, I've worked in nonprofits, I've worked in tribal government, I've worked for the federal government. And the one thing that I find is that people always want to protect you because there's this sort of like savior complex that exists. And I see that a lot with our fundraising team, where they don't want me to talk directly to donors, even though I'm the Lakota Indigenous woman who should be telling our story, because they don't want the donors to hurt my feelings. And I'm like, you know what? I grew up being called every name you can think of. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to connect me, right? And so I think that there's often that sort of layer that also happens where people try to put you in the container of when and where you get to talk. And what I shared in our Jedi Book Club last night for Proctor was that, you know, as a Native person, what I've experienced is that people want us to be us until we are us. And then when you show up at the room and you are you, then they don't want you to be you anymore, right? And so, but regardless, you have to just be you every day. Because there's generations of people coming behind us that, you know, are navigating through that. And when I think about what our ancestors do, like on my hardest days at work, it's still nothing compared to what our ancestors did for us to get to where we are today. And that's a constant reminder I have to give myself on some of those really hard days. So, Pilama Yape.
Oh my God, Emily, thank you so much. Don't protect us, connect us. I gotta pay you. That's just good right there. Thank you so much. I don't want to miss anyone kind of on these opening remarks, reflections. So just wanted to hold space if there was someone who didn't get to share on kind of living understanding of what or the code switch is or how it's shown up. If there is, then we'll hold space for that now. If not, then I'll turn to Paula, kind of our second question. No pressure to jump in the water. I also want to make sure that the train doesn't pull out of the station and leave any of our panelists with it on that first question. Hi, Penelope.
I can quickly jump in. So my name is Penelope Duran. I graduated from the White Mountain School in 2012. I'm currently a Spanish teacher. I've been teaching for 5 years now. And I think code switching for me, I've been thinking a lot about what everyone has been saying and mentioning, a lot of different stories that have resonated with me. Also an only child. I grew up in New Jersey, single mom. My mom is undocumented, which is an experience in itself. And so I learned from very early on that for me, code switching meant having a mask of like what you can show and when you can show it and when you have to put the mask back on. For me and my mom, it meant you can't let people in because you don't know if they're going to hurt you. You don't know if they're going to want to separate us. And it was just me and my mom growing up. So when I went to boarding school, to the White Mountain School, it meant putting on the mask and being whoever I needed to be in order to get by. If it meant being happy to go backpacking, then it meant being happy to go backpacking, you know, being grateful for the experience, being appreciative. And now it was, I mean, I enjoyed it. I guess I enjoyed aspects of my experience at White Mountain. I think I learned a lot, but I think I started to really see the effects of me limiting myself and using that mask too often when I went to college. And then when I started joining the job force and like just like working in general, and started noticing how much pent up rage I have. And I say I have because I still have it. And I'm still trying to make peace with all of the feelings that I have pent up and that I have kept inside for so long. And I think it's because of not being able to say no a lot of the times. I kept myself from saying no. I kept myself from saying a lot of different things. And so I have all these feelings and all these like different emotions that I can physically feel in my body, but don't know how to communicate. And I'm still learning how to communicate because I've worn the mask for too long. At times is the way I think about it. And now, you know, I've learned about different places and been able to explore different areas in which I can, and it is safe to take the mask off and, you know, and exploring who I am in those spaces and learning more about me and being able to almost give grace to myself and to my family and folks who have also, I know, and can tell have been forced to wear masks at different areas. But yeah, that's just what I think of when I think of code switching.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you all for getting us started. Penelope, what you point to very astutely is the hidden cost of attendance. You know, people usually look at tuition and room and board, but the cultural cost of attendance and wearing that mask pre-pandemic is a very real experience. So thank you all for getting us started in that way. Paula, we'll turn to you.
Sure. So I'm going to start by just giving you all big hearts for courage. And Emily, you just preached the word. People want you to be you until you show up as you. That is my new signature on my email because, that's the truth. Lizzy, I'm going to start and ask all of you to to answer, but I'm going to start with something that you said, Lizzy, which is that code switching is a tool. You talked about code switching being a tool, and I would imagine that part of the reason we're having this conversation and around code switching in independent schools is because, and I'm looking at my friend Josh Leroy there, they don't want you to come into school and have to code switch. Like, the point of belonging is so that you don't have to do that. And so I want you all to talk about, for the people who are listening, how do they create an environment? What are the things that they should be doing so that you don't feel like you have to code switch? Or tell us what tools you use to code switch so that when they see it from another student, they'll recognize it and be like, maybe we need to do something different here. Any of you can answer that first, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I would say that it's really I think it came across immediately for me in language, in behavior, and in communication. Language and communication are not the same, because you come to find that the way that you communicate with your peers, whom you're comfortable with, is different from how you communicate with your peers whom you're not comfortable with. Language matters. I have an accent, but it comes out only when I'm comfortable, for example, with my family, or if I'm in a Ghanaian community, my African accent will be much louder. And so I code switch even from like when I'm home versus when I'm with my friends. That's another code switch, only because my friends will better understand me when I'm in this language versus when I'm home, I drop the accent because my parents will better understand me with my home English accent. I also think that it's in behavior as well. For example, even in school, even how you communicate with teachers and professors. Again, I'm going to use the example. If I tell my professor, let's get this reading popping, all I'm trying to say is I'm excited about the reading and I can't wait to get into it. But again, will they understand if I actually come across that way? One way to kind of like push forth the boundaries of code switching is to kind of force them to understand what you're saying. So for example, I remember at Bowdoin College, whenever I would use, let's say, tell my professors, let's get this reading popping, I would then say, what I'm trying to say, professor, is blah, 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 X, Y, Z. So that it kind of I normalized how I would communicate with my professors or my peers, which then forced them to understand me no matter what I was saying. And so I learned to code switch less. But in the professional world, you kind of, because again, you're trying to like advance in your professional skills and etc., you kind of have to ease your way into it. First finding like community where you know you belong. Because the layer of code switching is also this whole idea of like, do you even belong in this community? Because that's when we talk about like equity, diversity, inclusion, right? That comes up. So you might even have to give up code switching if you're not in a community where you feel like you're included or you belong, because they won't get it. So the battle there is lost. And that's really sad and that's heartbreaking, but sometimes you kind of have to give up. I was in a community where I had to stay in my quote unquote, my white customer voice where it's like, hi, good morning. I could never drop that accent because I never belonged in that community, and I there was no point until I left that space and I found a different community where they were so excited to have equitable like resources and to focus on inclusion and belonging and etc. So I would say that tool, once you recognize how you're switching, then you can maybe create a key code to help the people around you understand like, hey, when I'm switching into this is what I mean. And then eventually you can kind of cross that bridge and just get to the what you mean part without having to always explain or teach. But the work kind of has to, unfortunately, you kind of have to do that work because we just live in that world where it's going to have to come from you. But you'll wake up one day and you realize, like, oh, I'm so happy I don't have to code switch anymore. And I'm at that place now in my career where I don't have to code switch anymore. And I'm so glad, because it's such a heavy burden to carry around with you this level of acting because it really is, right? This level of acting, and you're just consistently in your mind about like, how am I going to be perceived? How am I going to be understood? At the end of the day, we all want to be understood, and we all want to be comfortable in the places that we want to be heard and seen. And I'm just glad that, like, again, going back to my high school experience, I didn't really need to code switch when I was at Dublin, but I learned how to there because I was in a space where I was with my friends and basically second family, where I knew that they would understand me without having me to teach them who I was.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Now, come on, I know y'all got tools.
So yeah, I'll jump in just because you called out Josh Leroy, and I would love to have my shot at Josh as well. So I can definitely understand the difficulty it must be, especially given someone who was in my position, single mother, being sent to, Cardigan, New Hampshire, and then as an adolescent, really looking for, that adult Black male role model. So to answer the question simply, it's representation, right? There has to be some form of, and I hear it's getting better, so I'm not trying to point the finger at Cardigan, but there has to be more representation for the young, Black student. Someone that looks like him, someone who's kind of lived through, the hurdles and obstacles that child will live through eventually, so they can kind of navigate them. I think a lot of what I dealt with, and it kind of turned into a positive, was that I looked at some of my friends' fathers for that like adult role model. It became a positive because, those friends then became lifelong friends. We've started businesses together. We've really turned that friendship into somewhat of a family. But it's also detrimental because as a young Black male, it would be nice to know the obstacles of what adolescent Black male, teenage Black male, adult Black male will face, especially in our country, obviously given the environment. So again, that was a long-winded way of saying representation. I guess, upping people's salaries will attract them to go up to Canaan, New Hampshire. I'm not sure, Josh, but good luck.
I think also the support for just helping with confidence. I remember when my mom and I and one of my sisters went out for my son's graduation, and my mom said, "The students here are just so confident." And she was referencing the white students that were walking across the campus, and they knew that they belonged there, right? And that's part of it. And so I think it's that belonging. It is that representation. I had a unique experience where my dad was on the board of trustees when I was at Proctor, and so we had, as Native students, we had that representation of a Native person on the board at the time, and he still, every board meeting, got challenged on the scholarships for the Native students. He would say, like, I have to explain every time the necessity of this, but there was somebody there to do it. Whether that was something that he should have had to burden or not, there was somebody there. And so I just think about how do you help, how do you recognize and see that you have students that are constantly, I don't want to say grateful, but we knew as Native students, we knew we were lucky to be there, and we didn't want to do anything wrong. We didn't want to get into trouble. And so you're always like almost on eggshells, kind of in that space. And that impacts confidence of students, and that feeling of belonging.
Yeah, I totally agree with Malcolm and Emily's point. What I saw in high school was a little different, and my secondhand takeaways that I saw from students who did relocate and end up in the White Mountains versus where I grew up there, and it was just a short commute for me. A lot of my basketball teammates and people I played sports with had been from like Harlem, and they had been sent up to the White Mountains. And it seems great right away, like people assume that they would be happy to escape the city and they get into the White Mountains, it's a nice environment. but they had no support, like Malcolm said. Like there was no representation of Black leaders in school. There wasn't someone who could totally relate to their circumstances and had gone through the same thing they had. So you might think that like they would have a resource or an ear that would listen to them. Even if they did, though, it might not be the best person to hear their story because they won't totally understand what they're saying, because a lot of the time they weren't confident enough to even voice their issues with the environment they were in. They thought that they were expected to just blend in. That's not the case when you're growing up and trying to figure out who you are. Like, how do you become your genuine self when you don't even feel like you can display your genuine self? So I had some of that to some degree as a Black man in New Hampshire, but it was a totally different level for people who had actually been transplanted and uprooted and moved to a totally different place. And when there has been representation, sometimes it's fleeting because those people also don't feel supported. So there would be leaders who work in school, maybe they're there for 3 to 5 years, but they also don't have that residual, like compounding effect of people who have been there before them for them to have a resource. So it goes all the way up the chain, I think, and it's a systemic thing that just has to be kicked off and fostered through the process. But yeah, it goes from students to leaders to teachers. Everyone who's uncomfortable in a new environment needs some sort of ally, right? So it's a difficult problem to solve, but it's super productive if kids are able to be their genuine selves as they figure out who that actually is, in my opinion.
Thank you. Lawrence, I'm gonna ask a 2A question, so someone wants to answer, because this has come up in my trustee meetings. And I wonder if any of you can speak to the importance of representation at the trustee level, if you think it is important. And if you don't, that's fine. But that's one of the conversations that we often have as trustees, is it important that at that table we have the kind of representation that you're asking for among your faculty members? And if it is, tell me why. And if it isn't, tell me why. But I'd be interested in your perspectives around that.
I'll jump in there. So yeah, I think it's tremendously important to have representation at the trustee level, because the trustee level are the people who call the shots. Like we, not to use, a war reference, but like the teachers, the faculty members, those are the soldiers on the ground doing the day-to-day, really working with the students. But who's actually setting the vision for the ship, who's setting the vision for the institution, are your board of trustees, right? So if the board of trustees are, they all look the same, or all have the same background, or all have the same way of thinking, right? You're only going to be very narrow-minded when thinking about big picture items. So representation is extremely important at the top and at the bottom level, all the way throughout the ship.
I believe I was invited to be a trustee because the former head of school at Proctor, after George Floyd was murdered, I sent a message and asked him how the school was going to address the lack of diversity at every level of the school, and that if they couldn't answer that question, I could no longer support the school. And I just felt really that was really important for me to say that. And I asked that of other organizations. Fortunately, most of them were Native that I was serving, but are supporting. But I really think it's important, as Malcolm was saying, like just having that representation and that voice. But it's a lot of work because, again, you're code switching on that level too. But at the same time, you're able to have conversations with people that I don't think would be having conversations with me as just a regular alum of Proctor if I weren't on the board. But at least, there's still an opportunity to insert something, or to make a comment, or to say, to share some things, share some sort of learning in that space. But we can't continue without diversity and representation on these boards, on any board. I mean, we just can't. It's also it's minority, it's gender diversity. I mean, it has to be more inclusive, because we do need different thought in how to address solutions.
This is super important, and I'm grateful for you all. I'm also mindful of making sure that I keep us on on schedule. This is super helpful. What we'll do in a couple of moments, we'll make sure that we get, and thank you so much, Somali. I'll get to the question in a moment. We want to make sure to partition a little bit, to take a little bit of Q&A from our group. We'll go into a really awesome app that we'll learn a little bit about in a little bit. They'll let you all do a couple of round robins and quick pop-ins with Glimpse. I also want to make a couple of announcements that we certainly will be sharing out the directory of folks who have joined us and registered today. So you'll be able to network hereafter. We want to institutionalize this so that we do more of this on a more frequent basis. So check out more for that. I'm sure that as I mentioned it, it'll be like a TikTok. It'll show up in the chat somewhere. There's a plug for for aspiring educators of color, MALS, MALS program in Dartmouth. For folks interested in education, certainly want to share with folks of color. It'll pop up magically, not so magically because I'm queuing it in the chat, so folks can do that. We'll also tend to Somali's question to make some room for questions in a moment. I do want you all, and I'll get Somali's question. Neil, you like magic? I appreciate that. What I will do is get to Somali's question, but I want you all to think about kind of parting advice and wisdom here. I'll get the question, come back to it, but I'll give you all a moment. Think about the perspectives, the current student, rather, that might be on the call when this is recorded, sharing out. I remember coming to almost all of these schools gathered. I know it was like at White Mountain, and I see that student, maybe they're a freshman, maybe they're in their first year. They can't quite articulate it, but they're in that moment of like, home has to be better than this. They're kind of making that cultural negotiation. If you were giving them a reason to not pack their bags, to move into their room, to stick it out, to go on that field course, to go on that excursion, to go on that trip, to do that thing that seems culturally different. They're in the middle of making the switch, as it were. What might be like your quick direct message to them? So you can hold on to that seminal moment for 1 second. Somali, the question for the panel is, many of you refer to code switching as a tool. Have you ever felt that code switching was a double-edged sword? Ooh, Somali, yes, with the catch-22. Have you ever felt that the code switching was a double-edged sword that hindered you from effectively communicating in the professional space? So of using code switching as a tool, and one way it got me into a place, have I ever found it as a double-edged sword where either maybe I'm not now showing up as my authentic self, or now speaking a language in a world that I just don't quite find myself identifying? So maybe any downsides, maybe any paper cuts on the other side of that double-edged sword, thinking about code switching. That's Somali's question. And everyone doesn't have to jump in. If there's a response or two, they will go back to maybe that seminal TED Talk or Theodora talk about what we might say to a current student. But of the double-edged sword of the code switch, any thought about how it may not work for us sometimes?
I think the necessity of like feeling that you have to do it can oftentimes leave you, like, for lack of a better word, traumatized, to where I feel myself keeping walls up in corporate situations where I don't necessarily have to. But I've been in previous situations where I did, so you're just predisposed to having your guard up, which can also hold you back from building genuine relationships where people who don't have to do the same are able to do so faster and more naturally.
Yeah, and that goes back to the kind of that cultural exhaustion as well of like, what's my elevator pitch? What are people used to hearing? What's that thing that makes the room laugh? It's exhausting. So
for sure.
Nathan, thank you for that. Okay, seminal moment. You're directly talking. You got audience with that current student, right? Hey, by the way, as you all have maybe even named it, faculty, staff member, whoever's making that cultural community negotiation, maybe this isn't worth it. You all are a living proof. Again, with roses, there are thorns, but you stuck it out. See what I did there? Thorns, you stuck it out. Witticisms on a Monday. But if you were going to say to folks to hang in there, what might be just your quick rapid fire advice about someone unsure about making that cultural negotiation and about making the switch it can be popcorn style, but if you had a quick word of advice about why it might pay off for them to stick around, to hang in there, anyone can start.
I just think about the independence that I feel like I mean, you'll have to be brave, but with it will come independence to feel like you can try and do anything that you want to do because you've already done one of the hardest things, and that's walk into an environment that's completely like uncomfortable and foreign at a really young point in your life. And I totally have had amazing benefits from it, but I think just remembering that it is being brave and that you will come out very independent.
I love that, coming out of independent schools. Independent. I kind of dig that. You are like a marketing machine. I feel like I need to write a check somewhere. You are in development too. So Emily, I feel like I owe you. Others.
Yeah, I would just say, and this is general, speaking of any obstacle that you really face, is that you know, the things worth really having in life usually are the more difficult things. So don't really run away from the obstacles, especially young in life or early in your life, because the obstacles don't start. And if you run away from this one, you're more likely to run away from the next one. So try to, you know, push through and see what's on the other side of the obstacle, because you'll be a different person for going through it.
Love it, Malcolm. Thank you. Calling your own shots. You better go ahead, Malcolm. That's a flex. Others.
I think it's important to just be true to yourself. I think back to one of the questions you asked earlier, Paula, when I was at VA, there wasn't really any conversation starter through the academy or any meetings that we had where we could really, you know, face these questions. And I think that really would have benefited me. Like, again, when we're in high school, we're all young kids, and we're still, you know, we might be more worried about our grade point average and beating KUA on a Wednesday than we are about some of these more important things in life. So, and I was definitely a victim to that. And I think that, you know, it would have been nice to have some facilitated conversations where these topics were brought up. And I think it would have allowed me, anyways, to kind of be who I was, be true to who I was, as opposed to kind of just being, you know, maybe a little bit fake about who I thought I was.
Love that. So the intentionality about creating the space. Miguel, thank you. Hi, Lizzy.
Hi, I would say that I think that so code switching, it is double-edged sword, right? Because it's like you have to kind of fake and pretend to be someone else or et cetera, just to get there. But I'm going to leave you with this analogy, and this might be a really horrible analogy, so I apologize in advance. But so for example, like Cinderella, homegirl was code switching because her fairy godmother helped her, you know, rendezvous, dazzle razzle dazzle to that ball where the prince finally noticed her. And afterwards, when the shoe fits, the prince was like, oh my God, it's been you all along. Like, I see you now. I mean, that movie was flawed because how did that glass slipper not disappear with everything else? That's beyond me. However, the point to this analogy is to say that she had to code switch to be able to, one, even let her through that door. They let her through the gates. She was able to get in. Yes, she had to leave, but at least she was noticed after. So it's like code switching is kind of like that tool where it allows you to survive there. Once you're there, you get to be seen, you get to be heard, and then you can maybe just like show that like you're crusty and the shoe just fits. But I'm kidding. But I hope you guys get the analogy where it's like, you just need to get through that door. You just need to get seen. You get to that part where you can finally be seen and heard and known that you're talented and gifted and excellent. And you can enjoy and all of that. And then you can peel back the layers, but you kind of do need to code switch in spaces where you just have to.
I appreciate that. And now I'll never see Disney movies or princesses or any, and I only watch Tiana and the Frog anyway now in Kanto, but thank you. That is super helpful. Others, kind of parting advice, at least from this part of it, to if you think about current students in mind.
I would say you don't know how it's going to turn out until you try it. I just think that kind of what Emily was saying about being brave, what Malcolm was saying about just the hurdles don't stop. There's always going to be another hill to climb. There's always going to be something else to confront. And I personally don't think it gets any easier. I mean, I don't know, like it gets maybe easier talking to yourself and saying, do it, but maybe if you take that leap earlier on, you might be braver the next time. You just never know what's going to happen after.
Appreciate that, Penelope. Thank you so much. What we want to do now is number one, if you all might, and it's a little bit of work virtually because you got to find like your reaction, and then there's like little hands. I've made mine brown because I like brown hands for myself, but there's somewhere where you can applaud. We just want to show some appreciation to all of these panelists and thank them so much for their rich and deep sharing. Confetti, yes, confetti will work too. Thank you all so much for doing that. We are grateful for you. I do see a hand from Jay as well as a clap, so I'll make space for Jay in a moment. Hey, Jay. Sorry. Yeah, Jay.
I pressed the wrong button.
Oh, that's all right. Hey, listen, appreciation is appreciation. What I do want to make sure that we do, because Glimpse is an awesome app, we want to make sure that we make space for folks from our administrators who have organized us to do that, because I think the biggest bang for your virtual buck is the fact that you get to network and connect with one another. As Miguel said, you're not playing each other on Wednesdays anymore. You're networking for a new team, and there's a game we can win together. Turns out networking is a team sport. I do want to make the transition to that, but not before we thank all of our panelists. Thank you, Paula, for all of your work and being an awesome co-moderator. And thank you to all the folks from the Lake Region, administrators, faculty, staff, heads, and board members who have made it possible, and to you, current students who are here, prospective students and families, are the better for us really reimagining a value proposition to a changing and very important demographic in our schools. So I turn it to some of our folks who have administrated to talk about Glimpse and how folks might go into those small breakout rooms. Thank you for the first of many events like these.